Welcome to Lit Vibes Only, where we lit the shit out of books we love and hate. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Kelsey. Welcome back to another episode. We have a Lit Rex episode for you today, and we want to steer you to our socials. Find us and interact with us on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And I think that's it.
You always want to say there's one more.
I know. So we are Lit Rex. I'm sorry. I always screw up the socials. We are Lit Vibes Only podcast on TikTok and YouTube. On Instagram, it's slightly different, where we have Lit Vibes Only _podcast. And we just want you to come interact with us. Say hi. Let us know like what books you're reading. Let us know which ones you've hated of our recommendations, which ones you've liked, whose side you're on. Like we want to know it
You're
all.
on mine.
Oh, get over it, Amanda.
I have excellent taste.
You can also go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and rate and review our podcast so that you can get a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Never before seen
in your mailbox sticker from Amanda and I. So all you have to do is write your review on Apple or write a comment on Spotify and review or rate, sorry. And then we will send you that sticker. You know you want it.
And how do we get that sticker to them, Kelsey? How will we know where they are?
Well, you have to send it to our socials. Yeah.
Yes.
It can be TikTok, or it can be Instagram, or it can even be our email, which is also litvibesonlypodcast@gmail.com. So send it to us anywhere you find us and send us your address so we know where to send it.
Yes. And then in a couple days, you'll have a nice shiny sticker in your mailbox and you're going to be so happy.
And then when you get it, show us where you stick it so that we can put it on our socials.
Yeah. Tag us on socials. We want to see where these stickers are ending up as they're making their way across the country.
Kind of hopefully like around the world. That'd be
cool. Well, last episode we talked about that one of them is currently in Canada. So we have officially gone international.
Oh my God.
So yeah, get your sticker. There's only 50. There's less than 50 now, but that's it.
Yeah.
There's just the 50. There are no more currently.
Gone.
So you know you want one.
So Amanda, thinking about when this episode comes out.
November.
It's going to be right after the elections.
I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed.
I know. So those of you who are not in the United States, which I think the majority of you are, our presidential elections are coming out. Actually, Amanda, this is right. Oh yeah, we said right after the elections, right?
Yeah, because this is going to be our second episode dropping in,
which will be on November 11th.
Yes,
so and even though that is a holiday for most folks, the episodes will still be coming. Just FYI.
Oh yeah, every Monday we will be here for you.
So yeah, we just wanted to take a minute to kind of like not necessarily like get into it, but kind of help you understand like how the election is like affecting our world.
Yeah, as educators being in schools.
Exactly.
Yeah, and just a recap, I am in a private school and Kelsey is in a public school. So even within that, there's some differences, I think, in how we're approaching, how we're handling the election, how we're talking about it, how folks are showing up. I will say that it's been interesting during our opening days meetings where it's just the teachers in August.
Oh, in August all the way.
In August. We were talking about the election pretty much as we hit the ground running. And my administration made it pretty clear to us teachers, as faculty and staff members, that we were not to wear anything political in nature. So no t-shirts, no hats, no pins. Like, even though they can't officially tell us not to do it, it's been very strongly encouraged that we are not to show up to school in any sort of political garb, which is interesting because our kids can, but we can't.
Of course. Yeah. But if someone did, what do you think would happen?
If a teacher did?
Yeah.
I think they would probably, I don't think they would like send us home to change. We're not children, but I'm pretty positive that someone on the leadership team would probably pull that person aside and just be like, hey, remember that conversation? Can you tell me a little bit more about why you made this choice? So I think it would
Jeez,
definitely, yeah.
awkward.
Oh, yeah. And it would either be like your department chair, like your direct supervisor, the head of the upper
Oh.
school, or the head of the middle school, I think would probably pull you aside,
Oh.
especially because we had that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so interesting
Wow.
because a couple of weeks after that, we
Mm-hmm.
had a student who's on our ASB, so one of our
Mm-hmm.
student leaders. He was running one of our upper school class meetings, and he was wearing
Mm-hmm.
a political t-shirt. It wasn't related to American politics. It was about Tibet. And I think it was Tibet. And I remember pulling aside the head of the upper school after that meeting, being like, hey, did you notice this shirt that, X student was wearing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Like, are we also having conversations with students about this? Like, it seems a bit one-sided to only have faculty kind of monitoring and thinking about what they're wearing and not having those
Mm-hmm.
conversations with our students too.
What do you think that conversation would look like with students?
Well, so that's the thing. And my head of upper school was like, yeah, that's a good point. We need to think about it. We need to talk about it some more and figure out what we want to do. Because my thought is, and this has already come up, is like, let's say we have a student show up in like a MAGA hat, right? Or like
Mm-hmm.
wearing a Kamala t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on, the other people in that space in their classrooms, you could potentially make someone else feel very unsafe, feel very uncomfortable. It could lead to perhaps bullying on either side. It
Mm-hmm.
could lead to really problematic conversations that are, not necessarily being facilitated and guided by faculty, that are like
Mm-hmm.
devolving and creating fractures in our community. And
Mm-hmm.
we haven't really talked about how to address it at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So far,
Like
it hasn't
if
shown
it
up in.
comes up or when it
Yeah,
comes up. Yeah.
yeah. And that makes me a little anxious as a teacher.
I see. I kind of puts you guys in a bad position
Mm,
if those things do come up.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but the line is right. Like you can't tell a student they can't wear something like that, right?
Well, as a see, that's the difference between our schools though, like because private schools have more say, like, private schools
Mm-hmm.
have uniforms where you are telling kids what they can and cannot wear. We
Sure.
have like we can have stricter dress code policies.
Mm,
But yeah, in terms of like what it says, there's are we infringing upon like their First Amendment rights? It can get a little complicated because you do also want
sure.
to be mindful of creating community that folks do feel safe in and seen in and valued, and
Mm-hmm.
it's tricky.
Yeah, super tricky. So teachers and staff members at my school have been very much wearing like
Oh, whoa, that's crazy.
stuff. Yeah, I don't know that I've seen kids wearing it
Mm,
because like when you're young, I'm at a middle school. Like when you're
mm-hmm,
young, you're not as like in it like
mm-hmm,
as adults are.
mm-hmm,
But yeah, sometimes they are, and sometimes I've had students like wear things for Palestine, and like
mm-hmm,
that's not an issue. It's just
mm-hmm.
that yeah, things did come up
Oh
around
yeah,
those things.
yeah.
And so yeah, it's a really hard line. Like, and we haven't made any sort of like we can't say you
Mm-hmm,
can't wear certain
mm-hmm.
thing at
Yeah,
our school
yeah.
to staff or to students.
Mm-hmm,
And so it's going to be what it is, like when the
mm-hmm,
time comes. So I'm like
mm-hmm,
curious how that's going to land. But basically, like in a school setting, there's so many different opinions
mm-hmm,
and like backgrounds that are represented in our school. And basically, it's our job to be like very neutral
mm-hmm.
for students to help
Yeah,
them solve
yeah.
their issues, right? And or concerns while not at the same time ever infringing on the rights of others,
Mm-hmm,
right? Because I've had to have conversations with students, about like the LGBTQ plus community where it's like,
mm-hmm,
well, that's my opinion and I have the right to that opinion. I was like,
mm-hmm,
sure you do, but you do not
mm-hmm,
have a right to harass anyone.
mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm,
there's a line there. And
mm-hmm,
if you're saying things that are cruel or unkind, like
mm-hmm.
you that's a rule. You
Right.
can't
Yeah, there's
cross
no
that
place for
line.
that ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really clear in that kind of
Mm-hmm.
event. But then when it comes to like a political thing, like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's a little more gray.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious like how it's gonna go.
I know.
Because we absolutely do have families that are like Trump
Oh yeah.
supporters, right?
Oh
They're
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And also, Kamala supporters,
Mm-hmm.
and like those two things do clash. And
Mm-hmm.
having them in a building of so many people.
Yeah. I
all
think
of
as a rhetoric teacher where it's all about, dialogue and public speaking
Mm-hmm.
and debate and discussion, I try to teach students the tools, right, that they need in order to navigate conversations in ways that are respectful and thoughtful and critical in terms of
Mm-hmm.
critical thinking. And one of the things that I'm doing with my upper school students, my freshmen at the end of this trimester, which unfortunately, this is probably going to, timing wise, will end up being after the election, I think. But one of my students' parents shared an episode from the Happiness Lab, which is another podcast
Oh
on how to
yeah.
disagree better. And it's
Mm.
beautifully done. And I'm going to be using that as a teaching tool to talk about, yeah, like how do we approach these conversations? What are some tools and strategies? Let's talk about false polarization. Let's talk about progressive amnesia. Let's talk about these things that are impacting our conversations. Let's think about the ways our emotions are dictating what we're saying right now instead of,
Yeah.
listening to the other person. So I think the best thing we can do as educators and as human beings, because adults need this information too, is to think
Mm-hmm.
about like, how do we navigate these conversations, even if we're disagreeing, right? In a
Mm-hmm.
way that is empathetic, that is kind, that is thoughtful, that is open to having our minds changed or
Mm-hmm.
approaching something from a different perspective. Because yeah, it's rough out here.
Yeah.
Our
And I
society's
also
so
think
polarized.
that part of the problem is that we don't have that skill like
No, nope.
widely,
Mm-mm,
especially in the
mm-mm.
United States. And that's why it's
Mm-hmm.
so polarized.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's scary to
Yeah.
think that that you can't hear someone else's perspective,
No.
and so that's dangerous territory.
It's so dangerous. And the internet has really lent itself to this polarization because we
Yeah.
formed these like social silos online where we only
Uh-huh.
interact with and listen to people who agree with us. And
Exactly.
then it also leads to really problematic rhetoric because people are just
Mhm.
essentially yelling at each other, right? There's no actual
Mhm.
true meaningful dialogue happening. People are just hurling insults and trolling each other, etc. And it has just made this really toxic environment. So,
Yeah.
ugh, yeah. Oh man.
I don't look forward to this future, Kelsey.
Yeah, but with all that said, hopefully this episode, maybe not this part, but the rest of this episode will be a way to take your mind off of all
Yeah.
that is currently happening in the world at this point. Uh,
Exactly.
so yeah, this is our third Litrex episode. We're
Oh,
just like, yeah,
dang.
we're
Look at
moving right
us.
along.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yeah.
We've come so
So
far.
these milestones.
I'm
Um,
so curious. Like, are we gonna like thinking about like out a year out? Like,
yeah.
how are we gonna do these episodes? What are they gonna look like? Are they gonna be different? Are we gonna do similar
Oh,
things or like
interesting.
focus on yeah,
Oh, I
because
don't know.
obviously
Yeah.
there's books from every heritage that you
Yeah,
can
that
think
doesn't
of
have
and
a
like
month.
so much
Uh-huh.
that oh that doesn't have a month and also like
Yeah.
but also there are more Native American books out there
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
like encompass different things and anyway
Yeah. There's
it's
we
just
have a,
something
there's
for us to
there's a
think
lot of ways
about.
we could go. A lot of ways we could go. But for now, we'll focus on November's heritage, which is Native American Heritage Month. You want to tell us all about it, Kelsey?
Yes, thank you. So, November is Native American Heritage Month, which also encompasses and includes Native Hawaiians and also Alaskan Natives. I just want to make that clear.
Mm.
And really honors and celebrates Indigenous excellence, culture, and traditions while continuing to remember and name the violent history of colonization committed by Europeans while never forgetting that these crimes continue to be perpetuated through erasure and violence against tribal communities, like in the present right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it encompasses like all of those things. Right. And so history is complicated and the present even is complicated. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I think Native and Indigenous stories really touch on, in my opinion. And so let's get into it.
Yeah. So for those of us who might be listening to a Litrex episode for the first time, Kelsey and I have both selected two books by Indigenous authors that tell Indigenous stories that we're going to share with you. We are not going to give you any spoilers, though. This is a spoiler-free
Yeah.
episode. We're just going to give you a little bit of information about the author. We're going to give you a quick little kind of, not a summary of the book, but like a little book jacket
Synopsis.
blurb. And then we hope that you'll check these out and let us know what you think on our socials. So, did you want to go first, Kelsey, or did you want me to go first?
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay.
So, the first book that I have, and I don't have it in physical form. And I wish I did because it's such a beautiful book.
Mm.
But my first recommendation is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. Or is it like Boulley?
No, I don't know. It's a good call. I don't know.
So Angeline is Sault
Okay.
Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, which is also known as the Anishinaabe tribe in the Michigan area. And
Mm.
so it was really interesting looking at Angeline's background, where she actually has a background in education. Her
Yay!
most recent job was being the director of the Office of Indian Education for the United States government.
What? That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Like
All
it's
right, Angeline.
huge. Like, so she was struggling with, she hasn't seen a lot of like native or indigenous stories being
Mm.
told. And she takes a contemporary lens. So it's not like fantasy or it's not romantasy, it's contemporary fiction. And she tells these stories through an indigenous lens of indigenous peoples. And so she did in her debut album, which is Firekeeper's Daughter.
Did you
She
say
did.
album?
Oh my God.
She is also a very talented musician in addition to being an author.
I swear to God, we can make, what did we say? We talked about doing
It's like a whole we should do a
lists of
list
like
of all of
things
your
that Kelsey says that she's like really thinks is right. Debut album would be it. And you would only understand that if you listen to this episode. there's there's gonna be merch, you guys.
So
There's
many
gonna be like some sort of
Kelseyisms.
Kelseyisms, like a shirt with all of them on the back or something.
Yeah, it's a whole list.
It would be hilarious. Oh, that would be one of them. Okay. Her debut novel was Firekeeper's Daughter. And she tells a story of a biracial, indigenous young person, young woman who is not enrolled in her tribe, but has deep roots within her tribe. And it kind of speaks to the identity of indigenous peoples, because it's never just like one or the other, right? We are all mixed. We're all like, a lot of us are biracial, and it can be a difficult journey. And that is at the heart of this story, in my opinion, is indigenous identity. And so Donis Fontaine is the main character of this book. And she is a very smart young person who is on her way to college. She struggles with the idea of leaving for college, though, because she feels like her family needs her, which is also a common narrative of young indigenous people. I struggled like going away for school when I was young. And so just a lot of different themes throughout the book that directly relate to like indigenous life, which I really appreciated and loved and related to. It was great. And so Donis is about to go off to college and is enjoying the summer with her friend Lily, and a tragedy strikes her community. And we know that there has been a lot of drug use, and use of meth has been on the reservation for a while, but has like really increased in recent years. And so she sees that affecting her community and affecting her friends. And so tragedy strikes, and then her story is propelled in a completely different direction. And then you just see her wanting to support her community. And there's so many beautiful moments, especially with the elders in this community. And I am so here for it. It's so, so sweet. Such a sweet novel. But also, I do want to give content warnings, because like many indigenous stories, it does contain like trauma and sexual assault, and also murder and drug use. And so keep those things in mind and acknowledge what you can bring into your life at this time. While it is a sweet novel, it also is filled with tragedies and heartbreaking incidents and events. So I don't think I'll tell you anything more. I think that's a good like introduction to what this book is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two things. One, we briefly talked about this before we started, is that, I'm looking at the list of books that we're recommending, and all of them have tragedy and trauma to some degree. And I think it is important because it is unfortunately a big part of what the Indigenous experience has been like in the United States because of the violence enacted upon them by colonizers and by Europeans. So yeah, I think just keep in mind as we go through these books, a lot of them are going to come with content and trigger warnings. And also, like, that is not the sole story of Indigenous peoples. There's so many stories of joy and triumph and celebration. And I want to make sure that we're not giving folks like a one-dimensional view of Indigenous peoples. And even within these stories too themselves, there are also those moments too. So the other thing I'll say, I just realized this as I was sitting here, is like, oh, we're recording this the day before Indigenous Peoples Day. Recording this on Sunday, and tomorrow is Indigenous Peoples Day. So how lovely.
The other thing that I wanted to add about the description of Native American Heritage Month is like, the irony of it and the way it's situated, the month that it's situated.
Oh, because go ahead.
Because Thanksgiving is celebrated in the month of November. Yeah, that is not.
It's not lost on you.
Yes, thank you. Because I was looking for that phrase.
Is that you just read your mind at this point. We're just so in sync.
Kelsey doesn't know that one, so here it is.
Oh man.
Yeah, exactly. And so just keeping that in mind. And also just tidbit, there is continued violence, and it wasn't just Europeans like the old times. Like, it's very current and like how this violence is being enacted onto tribal communities and Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then I'll start with my first book. So the book that I will be recommending is The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich.
Oh, okay.
And I first encountered this book when I was teaching at my previous school in New Jersey, because it was one of the required reads for, I want to say, either our sophomores or our juniors in their English classes. And I was a learning specialist at the time. I was working with all of our ESL students. And so I'd be very much reading these books along with them and helping them unpack them and use them to complete assignments. So that was my first introduction to this book. But before we get to the book, a little bit about Louise herself. So her mother is half Ojibwe and half French American. Her father is German American, and she herself is an enrolled member of the Anishinaabe Nation.
Oh.
And to Kelsey's earlier point that so many Indigenous folks are from multiracial backgrounds, I think it's very clear here with Louise as well. She grew up mostly in North Dakota, and the book, The Roundhouse, is also set in North Dakota on a reservation there. And in addition to writing adult novels, she also writes poetry. She writes children's books, and she kind of has an interesting personal life that I wanted to dive into for just a moment, because I found it a bit shocking and fascinating.
Okay.
So she fell in love with and married another author named Michael Doris, and they worked together on several books and like collaborated on them. She had adopted 3 children when she was single. And then when they got married, they had 3 biological children. So 6 children in total. After some years together, they separated and then ended up getting divorced. And some of the children ended up accusing Michael of sexual abuse. And a year after their divorce, he ended up taking his own life. And then later on, at the age of 47, Louise had another child with a Native American man who she's never publicly identified. So we don't know exactly who this person is, but I believe he's significantly older than her. I think if I remember what I read, I think he's like 18 years older. So just a really kind of bizarre, interesting personal life, which has then fed into her work and some of the different novels that she's written. She's a very well-established, very highly awarded author. A couple of her best-selling and award-winning novels include Love Medicine, The Beat Queen, Tracks, and The Bingo Palace. She was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2009 for The Plague of Doves. And then in 2021, she did actually win the Pulitzer for The Night Watchman. I have only ever read The Roundhouse by her, I believe. I don't think I've read any of her other work. I'd have to double check.
I feel like you would like the sentence. Cesario really loved it.
Oh, okay. I will have to check that out then. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed The Roundhouse. I think she's a very talented author, obviously. So I think I probably would. But the book itself, The Roundhouse, it was published in October of 2012. So not super recent, but also not super old. It's 323 pages, so not an insanely long book. And also, it has won a bunch of awards. It won the National Book Award for Fiction. It won the ALA Alex Award, the American Book Award, the Indies Choice Book Award for Adult Fiction, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Fiction, and it was named as one of the Atlantic's great American novels. So clearly this woman knows how to write a book. She knows how to write a really good book. And then for those folks who like to know what the Goodreads ratings are, because that determines whether or not they read a book, it's a 3.98 rating. So not too shabby. So this story, in terms of genre, it's both a mystery and a coming of age story. I love a good coming of age story. It's one of my favorite types of stories. And so this book is written as a flashback, essentially. So Joe, who is the main character, he is now an adult and he's reflecting back on the summer of 1988 when he was 13. And during that summer, a really like horrible, unspeakable crime was committed upon his mother. His dad is a tribal judge, and Joe, adult Joe, is also a tribal judge and has followed in his father's footsteps. And so essentially, Joe and his band of friends spend the summer trying to uncover the truth of what happened to his mother and to kind of seek justice for that crime. I think it's a fairly well-known fact that, crimes committed against Indigenous peoples are not always prosecuted. They're not always investigated. You even think about the ways in which like missing Indigenous women, those cases often kind of fall by the wayside. And so it kind of taps into that issue. It focuses on themes of family, of history, of obviously of culture, the way that violence can beget violence. And, we see that again. We mentioned this previously in our Trail of Lightning episode that, a lot of marginalized and oppressed communities suffer from, for example, domestic violence or violence against each other as an outcome of the violence that's been committed against them as a people. And so that comes up, and it really dives into a lot of the issues that I think many Indigenous people would read in this book and be like, yes, I have seen that. I've witnessed that. That has been part of my experience in some way. And I will say, in terms of trigger warnings, there is a trigger warning for rape in this book. So I think it's important for folks to know before they dive into it. I think both young adults and adults will enjoy it. I know that I learned a lot. I know that it led to some really fantastic discussions with my students. And again, it's just a really well-written book. So 5 stars for this one. If you haven't read it before, I highly recommend it. And if you have read it, we would love to hear what your thoughts are. So that's my first one.
Yay. Man, there's so many good books out there.
There are.
So my second recommendation gets a little closer to home. So my second recommendation is Red Paint by, and I want to say her name correctly, Sasha LaPointe. And I just wanted to make a point of saying that just because it is on her cover, right? I don't want to like overshadow it at all and do and so I want to do my best to pronounce it properly. This is a memoir of her life. And before I get into that, Sasha is from the Upper Skagit and Nooksack Indian tribes and is also biracial herself. And in her books, she's often exploring that identity. And throughout this particular book, Red Paint, I think it's so beautiful too. Like the cover is so pretty. So it's set in like the 1990s, 2000s. And back when Seattle was actually punk still. Because like that's what people remember about Seattle, but it just isn't anymore. That's not the vibe of Seattle anymore.
Yeah,
that is, yeah, it's tacky and like, yeah, it's very, very different. And so her memoir has themes of like her punk identity coupled with her Indigenous identity, has themes around trauma. And also this is something we haven't said in the podcast, but we mentioned in like a previous episode about urban, like we said, urban fantasy for Trail of Lightning.
Yeah.
But it's like in the Indigenous community, you are called urban Indian if you live in a city, right? And so technically that's like my identifier, right? Because I live in the city of Seattle and I no longer live on the reservation. And so that's also part of her work here. I will also say like huge trigger warnings for, gosh, it's like overall trauma, but it's also like rape and also miscarriage. And so I just want people to be really cautious of going into this novel. While I felt very connected to it, it also brings up a lot of like my own memories while I was reading it. And just like, I think is beautifully told from an Indigenous woman's perspective of how she's navigating the world through relationships, through jobs, through, healing. That's another big theme throughout her book. And I think she beautifully connects it to her ancestry, where she is doing research throughout her life on one like grandmother or something. And I believe it's her grandmother. It's like great great grandmother or something, where she's like connecting her life back to hers. And I think it's like beautifully done. And also, I'll say that's kind of the point of like being Indigenous, right? Is being able to connect it to your ancestry and like make those through lines for yourself. And I love that she did that in this book and for herself, because it is a memoir. Any questions about that? Because I feel like I'm missing things, but
no, I mean, I feel like because it's her memoir, there's not a lot to say in regards to like plot synopsis or anything. Like it's just like you're gonna hear about her life and hear some themes that'll come up in the memoir. So no, I think you encapsulated it really well. Okay, I will close things off then with my final book. I am actually currently reading this book and loving it, and it was also recommended by Kelsey. And I feel like very seen. Yeah, you literally texted me that I should read this book.
Oh, did you end up reading it, or you're going to read it?
I'm currently reading it right now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's right. I did.
You did. You were like, I think you might have been at a bookstore actually, and you were like, I think you'd like this book. And then I
shout out to Ridgecrest Books, because that's where I was.
Well, you nailed it, and I'm really enjoying it. And I was just gonna say, I feel very seen and understood by you. I feel like you're really just like you're getting it. You're getting what I like. I still need to work on my end. Although honestly, okay, another tangent. I feel like as I'm choosing books for you for Literature Quit, part of it is like, do I think Kelsey is gonna like that? Like that does factor in. But the other part is like, ooh, is this gonna make for like a good discussion?
Both, yeah. Like you're still gonna read ACOTAR. You're still gonna read Fourth
yeah, exactly.
So,
I'm gonna be starting this month actually. Okay. Yeah. So back on task. So the book is Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. Jessica Johns is a Cree writer from Canada. She's actually a member of the Sucker Creek First Nation in northern Alberta. And again, as with all of our authors that we've talked about, she has multiracial heritage. She also has English-Irish ancestry, and she also identifies as queer. And in addition to writing fiction, she also writes poetry and nonfiction. So just a little bit about Jessica. So the book itself, this is actually her debut novel, and it was published. I'm sure the album is forthcoming. Although she is an artist as well. So she's multi-talented. So it's her debut novel. She published it very recently in January of 2023. So it's not even a year old yet. And it's again a shorter book, only 259 pages. I'm hoping to finish it up tomorrow. And another like really like highly awarded book. So this book won I think it's Audie Award for Thriller Suspense in 2024, the ALA Alex Award. It was longlisted for the CBC Canada Reads list. It was shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award, and it was the McEwan Book of the Year Award winner. So again, highly awarded, and has a 3.92 rating on Goodreads. So again, not too shabby. The genre of this book would be categorized as horror/thriller. This might come as a shock to some of our listeners, but I don't actually like horror. I'm a big thriller/mystery person, but so far I'm not getting a lot of horror from it. It's creepy, it's bizarre, it's a little gory, but not too much. So maybe that's where the horror element is coming in, or maybe it's going to get more scary. But I think if you are a thriller lover like me, you'd probably really enjoy this book. It really just starts you right off with things happening and you being like, oh my God. So it tells the story of this young Cree woman whose name is Mackenzie. She's currently living in Vancouver. She is from Alberta, but she left 3 years ago. And it appears that the reason that she left home is because of some tragedies that have happened. Her Kokum, her grandmother, has died. Her sister, Sabrina, has also died. And she clearly has some tragedy and trauma in her past that she seems to be running away from. The book starts off with her having some really bizarre dreams, And the line between the dream world and the real world is blurred. So she'll like wake up and there'll be like an item in her hands from the dream that will then vanish. There's been some crows hanging around her house and like following her. It's really creepy. There have been crows in her dreams. And ultimately, she decides that she needs to go back home to Alberta to kind of make sense of what is going on and perhaps get some answers. And one of the catalysts that finally gets her to head back home is that she gets a text from someone claiming to be her dead sister, Sabrina. Oh, it is like mysterious, chills up your spine. Even though it is, this horror / thriller / mystery, the author, Jessica John, said that really the crux of the book in terms of themes is it's a story about grief and loss and how we process that. It's also about the themes of like separation and community. She comes from this really tight-knit Indigenous community that she separated herself from, and like what that means when you've removed yourself from a community and kind of the fallout from that and its impact on the other people in your life. It does touch on, and I haven't got to this point quite yet, but like the legacy of violence and colonialism that has been enacted upon Indigenous people for many, many, many years, and how that has impacted her and her family and her community. And then also really importantly, because it factors so much into the plot, is the importance of dreams in Cree culture and the ways in which you should like interrogate them and try to understand them and what they might symbolize and what they might be, trying to tell you. So to take heed. Again, I'm reading it on an e-reader, so it's percentage. I'm like 15% into the book. Again, thoroughly enjoying it. So by all means, read along with me, and then we can have a chat about what y'all think if you pick it up. But again, I think if you are a thriller / mystery reader, I think this is a book that you will likely enjoy.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I think
interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm so glad you recommended it. So just as a quick recap, my 2 books were The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich and Bad Cree by Jessica Johns.
And mine was Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. And my second one is Red Paint by Sasha Bleu LaPointe.
So if you end up reading any of these, or if you've already read them and have thoughts, please let us know. Again, you can comment on this episode if you're listening on Spotify, and you can also hop on our socials, TikTok or Instagram. Let us know what you think.
Please
We're
do.
excited to hear from you. But yeah, happy reading. And again, our goal here is to like get us all reading different things, expanding our perspectives, having these conversations. So we hope you'll join us in this journey.
Yeah. I had a friend just recently. She like sent me a message. I think I shared it with you.
You
and
might
she
have,
was like a screenshot of her current audiobooks.
Oh, yes.
And it was like all of our recommendations from last month. I was like, yeah, that's what we want.
We do. And then we want to hear from you though.
Yeah. And then let us know
and
what
then
you
tell
think.
us. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much I did it again. I always say awesome at the end. I'm like, all right, awesome. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Oh, wow.
I have to come up with something else, but awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. And we'll see you next Monday.
Amanda isms. Next Monday. Bye.